next speaker will be Professor Henry Johannes Glanton. He's not Chinese, but he's expert in Chinese medicine, right? He's the director of the Chinese Medicine Association here in Germany and president of German Society of TCM, and also director for Heidelberg School of Chinese Medicine. And he's also clinician and is also ranked #1 as clinician few years back. So for the Naturheilverfahren and also doing a lot of research in Chinese medicine. Let's welcome Professor Glanton.
Thank you very much for this very warm welcome. And let me express how much honored I feel to speak after my good old friend, Professor Xiao from Hong Kong and Macau. I thought it was a very pleasant talk and very interesting for me to learn about that. Isn't that a funny world? I'm not Chinese and I'm preaching on Chinese medicine, and you are Chinese and you're preaching on DNA. I find this is really great progress. And now what I have to say is that there is an open question talking about Chinese medicine, and that is whether it's actually useful to know its theory for modern research. And surprise, surprise, I find it's extremely necessary to know it. And the actual questions that I raise are that, is it really possible to rationally access this old knowledge? And as an example for that, I was taking up what is sometimes referred to as the tastes or the flavors, which are known to everybody who's in Chinese medicine. And I would also explain a little bit of the system theory of Chinese medicine. Now, of course, I run into deep trouble putting Chinese medical theory in a nutshell of 15 minutes. So I beg your pardon in advance if this is not complete. But maybe you get an idea of what we're working on. So I would love to refer to what we call the Heidelberg model of Chinese medicine, which is a mathematical model that describes Chinese medicine as a model of systems biology. And we go back some 300 years, more than 300 years, to the famous mathematician Leibniz, who discovered that the yin-yang lines in the I Ching are actually numbers. And these numbers have been used to show to describe circular processes. And just to make clear what that means, it is that a circular process here, 1, 2, 3, 4, or in a later language, which comes in up about the 3rd century before Christ, we call this wood, fire, metal, water, and the center is the earth. So what is that good for, and why is that science? Well, it's science because it deals with regulation. So here as a simple model of regulation, that's an incubator, a thermostat, and a heater. And when you go in your lab in the morning, you have room temperature, but you want to achieve maybe 37 degrees. So what you do is you switch it on, and when it has reached 37 degrees, something happens that you know from your kitchen. When you switch off the stove, there is still some warmth in the plate, right? So don't touch it. And this is called afterheat, and it produces this maximum. And then when you go lower than that, the heater starts again in order to reach 37 degrees again. And then again something happens that you would know from kitchen. You switch on the stove, but it's not hot, so it remains cool. So there is some latency until it's heated again, so there is a sort of a minimum. Now, you may know that this is sort of a sinus wave, and a sinus wave is easy to explain. It's actually a circular movement, so a pipe organ player would use it like that. So you go around with your music, but when you look at it from that perspective, it's up and down. But when you walk, it's a sinus wave. So actually, you have this movement, and then you have a sinus wave from that perspective. So actually this year is that year, right? So always when you go up, it is the axis that tears you down. So therefore you can mark the axis and say, wow, wood, fire, metal, water, it's symbols of regulation. So it's a regulatory theory, a cybernetic system. Putting this on man would mean that the sign that's derived from it, it shows simply that the circle and the sinus wave and the target value and the center has something to do with each other. So this is not a mystical symbol, this is a mathematical and technical symbol. And therefore I would refuse to speak of philosophy at first place. That may happen in other aspects, but this is technology, it's ancient technology. So when you put this to man, you see that the vegetative system knows certain mechanisms, and we could allocate 132 of these mechanisms to the phases that upregulate or downregulate the body. And you have these clinical pictures that you know from Chinese medicine that appear in the phases as a manifestation of the qi, a manifestation of the regulatory state. So basically what you have is the phases, Wu Xing, are a concert of vegetative mechanisms in Western physiology. So there are so many of them that you can't make one measurement to determine them, but that makes it also complicated to measure the whole process, the biological process, in terms of putting up the right parameters. So you could even go further and say, wow, during you have these signs, the liver region is expanded, or the heart region, or the lung region is not expanded. You are not in the young part of the curve, you are depleted, you are empty. So you have empty body islands, as we say, or empty places in your body that you can, which is a system of sensations. Did you feel it? Less activated by your vegetative system. And that is how the basis is explainable, the basis of the central terms is explainable in a Western physiologic context. So I could say we have partially decoded Chinese medicine and can speak of it as a physiologic model. So the organs then are neurovegetative functional patterns. And that means that if you speak of repletion, depletion, fullness, emptiness, and so forth, you speak of vegetative functions actually. So you can name them by what you perceive. This is the hepatic pattern, the liver pattern, but you can also measure a couple of key values, and we are currently developing the parametrization of that, which is, of course, a work of several generations. So even for the downregulation, upregulation, we would have patterns like the stomach or the spleen patterns that would allow to, let's say, describe it as a regulatory process. And that is why we also have 6 and not only 5 tastes. If it was in the beginning Wu Jing 5 phases, then we would naturally have 5 tastes, but we don't. So it is based on that curve, and that makes it clear these tastes are actually vegetative pharmacological actions. But we all know the vegetative system increased. You have a lack of fluids in the larger vessels, and of course you have a pre-inflammatory state. With all these signs that you know from your TCM school, these are all explainable by one physiological change. So the distribution of fluid changes, and as you know, you have this curve for the vegetative signs, but with repletion or fullness comes calor or heat. So you have a parallel curve, and both are interacting. So that means, like in the body, in the perspective of the West, we have vegetative and microcirculatory events that are deeply interconnected in the whole network of body regulation. So if you want to have some more of these ideas, this is the 6 stages of a common cold. There is some evidence already that the Shanghai theory deals with these specific cases that we could, by some catchwords, characterize as this. But you could also say, wow, these neurovegetative patterns that some call organs are also involved. And along with this goes a curve of heat and cold. So wherever this curve, as we know already, appears, there is some sort of regulation behind. And that means that we have not only 2 of these functions, but we have 3 of these functions, and actually even a 4th one that I, for time's sake, cannot explain today. And they are all interacting. So instead of leaving the whole body system as a non-linear, almost unexplainable system, we put it up into 4 pseudo-linear terms to describe the non-linearity in a patient. Now, why is that of any importance? Because with such a language, you see, as that is too difficult, we can put this into one symbol that I would love to explain again for time's sake. I won't. You can ask me after the lecture. So we can, by TCM, understood as system biology, when we can describe the pharmacologic effects in a Western language, in the language of physiology. And by that we can raise hypotheses of the molecular effects that we could then check. And if you like 2 examples, I would love to show you. This is a note work of our group where we show that Rhizoma coptidis is able to interfere with NF-kappa B translocation, and it's an important tool to diminish heat. So that's the basic idea of coptis. And here we show that macrophages are inhibited in the sense of AP1 and NF binding activity, which you can almost inhibit totally. So what you see is understanding Chinese medicine may lead to understanding of the pharmacology, and then you must check by experiments. And the conclusion of what I have to say is easy. You can rationally, no. Okay, I'm sorry, something happened here. You can rationally understand it, and you can also generate the hypotheses, and this may be enormously time and money saving in the process of drug development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Professor Grattan gave us a quite new version of the Chinese medicine combining with the Western medicine. So, yeah, any questions from the corridor? Yeah, please.
Thank you, Professor Grattan. I have just a simple question. Please go to the slides about Rhizoma coptidis. That's Chinese herbal medicine. I see that. The next one. I see that DNA binding activity. I want to know, you conduct the extract of this herbal drug or a single compound?
No, we took the full extract and we compared, yes, the full extract, and then we compared other alkaloids from it. So there is, for instance, berberine in it and other alkaloids, and we could see, which is not mentioned in this here, in this work here, that it's not berberine who does it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
The full extract from the organic phase or aquatic phase?
Aquatic.
Aquatic phase. For the purity?
It is simply because we use it as a concoction. Mm-hmm. That is how it's used, and so we take it as it was used. Mm-hmm. We've tried out different forms of extraction, but this is the aqueous extraction.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, please. Yeah, Thomas. Yeah.
So, very nice talk, Hannes. I have heard you on several occasions, and it's always a pleasure to listen to you. So my question to you is, you tried to explain Chinese medicine with terms of Western physiology to make it more easily understandable for the Western audience and Western scientists. So my simple question to you is, have you also ever tried to use your system to explain Western medicine?
Yes, actually it's the same. It is what the Western faculties call Mess- und Regeltechnik. So it's on the technique of regulation and measuring. But we can prove that this kind of version actually is already inherent in the I Ching, which is much earlier than the Huangdi Neijing. And we have also shown that application of this diagnostic system can augment acupuncture success by the factor 2. So it's the double effect in comparison to so-called Western standard acupuncture. Now, we cannot try out all plants possible because the plants are so complex and the different concoctions have also different functions according to the teaching of how to build up some concoction. But the actual idea is that the theory of medicine must be the theory of man. And man is a non-linear system that you cannot well characterize by the normal lab values. So that is why 85% of the patients come with complaints, but they don't have any changes in the lab values if they go to a general practitioner. So this, for the patient in the West especially, is extremely unsatisfying. Here we can describe people in their regulatory state, in their regulation, and we can do this in 4 subsystems, which is just rationally understandable. But then we can pick up the right therapeutic measures, and we are not short of things that we could measure, that we could mix. So we would mix, like in China, paracetamol occasionally with cortisone and Coptis, if that's not sufficient. So where Chinese herbology is not sufficient, of course we go to Western medicine, and the other way around. I'm not saying let's Westernize Chinese medicine. No. I would rather say put it on the same theoretical background because it's all on one subject. It's about man. And that this theory is inherent in the I Ching, I don't mind. And if it would come from Africa or from the North Pole or from the Mars, whenever it's useful, I would use it for my patients.